Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of the Burgh Breakdown, the trade deadline reactions episode for the Pittsburgh Pirates. That's going to be the majority of today's show because there was a lot that has happened over the past 24, let's just stretch that back to 72 hours for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and the feeling around the organization is much different now than it was just 24 hours ago when we woke up on deadline day. So we'll break down everything that Ben Cherington did when it came to the trade deadline. We'll break down a bit of unfortunate news for one of the longest tenured Pirates on this team. And then we'll talk a little Pittsburgh Steelers to close things out as they kicked off padded practices on Monday in Latrobe. But let's get things started with the Pittsburgh Pirates, and specifically with what Ben Cherington did over the past 3 days leading into the trade deadline. All I can say is that was a heck of a lot of fun. There were some people that said, okay, well, now that the Pirates struggled in that homestand, it was a huge homestand against Chicago and Arizona. Not only do they not win it, but they end up going 2-4 against two teams that they are battling for wildcard positioning with. Then they lose 3 of 4 to the Cincinnati Reds, who are currently in dead last place in the NL Central. And the thought process was, well, did this back them off of making any aggressive moves at the trade deadline? And the answer to that was no, not at all. Ben Cherington said as much, but sometimes what a general manager, no matter who it is, says and what he does are usually two completely different things. But Ben Cherington, true to his words, stayed aggressive and added in a very big way, addressing the Pirates' biggest need, not once, not twice, but 4 times leading into the trade deadline. Shoot, if you want to extend it back a month, he has now brought in 6 different relievers to try to bolster this bullpen. But a lot of the biggest work that he did happened over this past weekend, starting on Saturday, when he made a trade with the New York Yankees to get Camilo Doval, sending Omar Alfonso and outfield prospect Luis Garcia back the other way to the Yankees. An interesting situation because you traded your closer to the Yankees last year at the deadline, and that was part of the reason why you were struggling in the bullpen. But now you get a former all-star closer in Camilo Doval from the Yankees. Now, he hasn't been that with the Yankees, but he certainly was when he was with the Giants. And I think we've seen a little bit of the Jekyll and Hyde already. He gave up a home run in Cincinnati, but again, that was a garbage time home run, right? He left a cutter middle, and that's going to get hit out, especially in that ballpark, a lot of the time. And then he was phenomenal last night in Milwaukee in the 8th inning. So, again, adding Doval is a nice high leverage piece that has the potential to turn into a very, very good late inning reliever for you once again. Now, again, I mentioned he was really good in San Francisco, save for one season where he struggled. And he did struggle pretty much the entire time that he was a New York Yankee. If you look at this season alone, it was mainly when he was playing at Yankee Stadium, which is not an easy place to pitch. He had played 20 games at Yankee Stadium this year, 20 1/3 innings, and a 7.08 ERA. Meanwhile, on the road this season with the Yankees, 24 games played, 19 1/3 innings pitched, so essentially the same amount of time, but a 1.86 ERA. Get him out of the child's playpen that is Yankee Stadium and put him into the big boy ballpark that is PNC Park. I think you're going to start to see more of the 1.86 version of Camilo Doval, the version that we saw last night in Milwaukee, than the version that you've seen in Yankee Stadium for the past calendar year. So excited about the Camilo Doval acquisition. If that was the only trade they made, probably wouldn't have been enough. But Ben Cherington was not done by a long shot. It was quiet early on deadline day, leaving a lot of Pirates fans a little anxious, thinking, okay, is this the only trade that's going down? While the Dodgers are getting Tarek Skubal, while the Phillies are getting Luis Arraez, while the Brewers are adding Dustin May and another pitcher. And it felt like, the Cubs getting a whole slew of pitchers on deadline day. It felt like the Pirates were starting to fall behind. Then all of a sudden, in quick succession, Ben Cherington started coming out with big trades. And it started and was probably capitalized and punctuated by trading for Luke Weaver of the New York Mets. About midway through deadline day, he sends shortstop prospect Sammy Stafura to the New York Mets to get what is going to be their closer, at least one of their two closers going forward, in Luke Weaver. He is dominant so far this season, to say in a word. 42 games played, 44 innings pitched, 1.84 ERA, and has given up one earned run over his last 30 innings of work. If you're looking for someone you can trust in the bullpen, I've heard that a lot, is, well, people are upset that Don Kelly hasn't managed the bullpen well. Other people are saying, well, what does he have to manage? Does he have anybody that he can lean on to just go out there and do what they expect them to do? Now you certainly have a couple of players like that. I think especially with the way that Mason Montgomery has currently been pitching, but Luke Weaver is that guy. One earned run in 30 innings, a 1.84 ERA all of this season, and you don't only get him for the remainder of this year, you get him for next year as well. And you got the New York Mets to eat almost half of his salary going into next year, and we know, being the Pittsburgh Pirates, that was an important factor. The Mets take that $11 million salary for 2027, and they cover $5 million of it. So the Pirates will be paying only $6 million for who will be their probably most important reliever going through the 2027 season. Now, again, this guy is probably going to be one of the Pirates' closers, but he did work primarily in the 8th inning with the Mets this season. So, yes, I think that he'll probably wind up being the guy Don Kelly tabs to be the 9th inning piece a lot, but I also see him and Montgomery as two guys who have been in high leverage this season, but haven't been in that 9th inning. And there's sometimes a little bit of a difference between going in the 8th and going in the 9th. And we've heard a lot of baseball players mention that it's a little bit harder to get the final 3 outs than the penultimate 3 outs. So I think we could see them sharing that responsibility a little bit. It might be matchup based, but regardless, the Pirates now have multiple options that they can choose to go to when it comes to the 9th inning. Now, they weren't done. If they would have done those two things, I think Pirates fans would have been like, okay, yeah, you address the bullpen. And it's substantially better than it was before the deadline. But then right as 6 o'clock rolled around on Monday evening, the Pirates made 2 more trades. First, acquiring Lake Bacher from the Miami Marlins, a long reliever, which made you think, what's going on here? And we'll talk about that in a second. But you bring in a guy that, again, is having one of the better seasons of the Miami Marlins bullpen. You send Brandon Beddois and 2 minor leaguers, so not a hefty price to pay, and you shore up the middle portion of your bullpen. And then they went to the Angels and acquired Kirby Yates, sending Double-A pitcher Kyle Robinson for a guy who's going to be your 1-inning 6th, 7th. So you addressed the late innings by bringing in Camilo Doval and Luke Weaver to add to Gregory Soto and Mason Montgomery. And the question was always, well, can you get them there consistently? And with only a handful of options, do you have somebody that you can trust to step in if one of them is unavailable? Now they do. They bring in the 39-year-old Kirby Yates, a 1-inning guy, to help them get to the back end of that bullpen that is all of a sudden a lot scarier than it was a couple of days ago. Lake Bacher has a 3.84 ERA this year with the Miami Marlins. Kirby Yates has a 3.95 ERA this year with the LA Angels, which ranks 5th and 6th among Pirates bullpen pitchers this year. So the fact that their 3rd and 4th highest profile acquisitions at the deadline would have their 5th and 6th best ERAs in their bullpen already, I think that you can look at Monday and really let's lump together the whole weekend and include that Doval trade. Ben Cherington completely revamped this bullpen And now it looks, again, we'll have to see how it shapes out, but it looks like you have a pretty solid bullpen, if not a bullpen that could become a strength going down the stretch, which is huge for the Pirates considering how much it's cost them to this point this season. So you add Bacher, you add Yates, you add Weaver, you add Doval to a bullpen that had already started to kind of catch a little bit of a second wind, kind of catch their footing a little bit coming out of the All-Star break. The bullpen has been a lot better. I mean, we're talking 20 to 30th in the league before the All-Star break. We're talking top 15 bullpen coming out of the break. Now you supplement that with 4 very good pieces, and all of a sudden, the Pirates might actually have something in their bullpen. I'm looking at 4 high-leverage guys in Mason Montgomery, in Luke Weaver, in Doval, and in Gregory Soto, who also had a really good outing last night, going 1 1/3 innings, kind of escaping some trouble. And then you have 4 mid-relievers in Evan Sisk when he returns, which should be pretty soon, Lake Bacher, Kirby Yates, and Johan Ramirez, who has, I believe, a 1 ERA since the All-Star break. So yes, the Pirates bullpen, I'm not going to say is fixed. We have to see how it plays out. We have to see how these new pieces fit and how they perform in Pittsburgh. But the Pirates bullpen has a much better outlook than it had been for the entire season. Now, part of that bullpen and one of the only silver linings in that bullpen was Carmen Mlodzinski. And you notice I didn't mention him at all in that first segment, and that is because he's unlikely to be a bullpen arm for the remainder of the season, because we found out also on deadline day that Mitch Keller is going to be out for the season. He was placed on the 60-day IL with an injury to his right throwing shoulder. And it's a tough break. I understand that there are people that are rightfully so hard on Mitch Keller. He was supposed to be the vet of this group, the only vet of this group of starting pitchers, and he was supposed to be the guy that helped alleviate pressure from the other guys, because he could go out there and consistently go 6, 7 innings and hopefully a little bit more. But he wasn't that this season. 6-8 record in 22 games, 5.29 ERA, which is the highest that he has had in a season since 2021. And coincidentally, this is also going to be his first IL stint since 2021. So I don't know when this started to become an issue for Mitch Keller, but it's just unfortunate that in a season where the Pirates are as close as they have been in a decade to making a run for the playoffs, that Mitch Keller has to now watch that from the sidelines, being one of the 2 longest tenured members of the Pirates. Now, here's the thing about Keller. Is the last outing in Cincy a result of the injury, or is it just the fact that he struggled in Cincy? 2 innings pitched, 7 earned runs, 6 hits, 4 walks, and 2 home runs allowed. That's probably the worst start he's had all year, in a year where he's had some pretty bad starts. But going into it, he had pitched 2 of his better games of the entire season. At the Yankees, he went 5 scoreless innings, giving up just 3 hits and striking out 6. And then in that huge series against Arizona, he was the only one to get the team to a win. 5 1/3 innings pitched, 2 earned runs allowed on 6 hits, and 1 walk and 4 Ks. It felt like he was starting to gain momentum. We talked about that on the Burgh Breakdown. And then he has 1 rough outing, and now he's on the IL and his season is over. So it's a tough break for Mitch Keller. And yes, I wouldn't disagree that you might get slightly better by putting Carmen Mlodzinski into the rotation, especially now that you backfilled his spot in the bullpen with Lake Bacher. But now it's time for Mlodzinski to prove it. He made it known that he was not happy moving back to the bullpen, that he wanted to be a starter. This is what he's wanted all year long. Now's his chance to go out there in a very important time for this organization to prove that he should have been a starting pitcher all along. If you look at the numbers, to say that he's a better reliever is not just a truthful statement, but it's a very, very obvious statement as a starter this year in 9 games played. Carmen Mlodzinski had a 2-3 record, but a 4.3 ERA over 44 innings pitched. Meanwhile, as a reliever, in 16 appearances, he had a 4-0 record, 2.15 ERA in 50 1/3 innings pitched. So he is twice the pitcher that he is in the bullpen that he is as a starter. And yet it's still going to be a slight improvement for the Pirates on the mound over what Mitch Keller has been able to provide throughout this season. So I love where the Pirates currently stand. And it's even better that they were able to go out there and get a massive victory over the Milwaukee Brewers on Monday to start what is becoming a very, very important series. I mean, every series now is going to be important. But if you look at what the Pirates were able to do, backfilling his bullpen spot for Mlodzinski to help make up for the fact that he's moving on to become a rotation piece again, adding Lake Bacher, who has gone at least 2 innings or more in 17 of his 38 appearances this year for Miami, and also, it feels like they've been kind of starting to calibrate Yohan Ramirez to become that more consistent long relief pitcher, going over an inning pitched in 3 consecutive games leading into the MLB trade deadline. So you have 2 pieces there to help fill the role that Carmen Mlodzinski leaves behind as he heads for the starting rotation. But an exciting day nonetheless for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now they have to really go out there and prove it. It's on the players. It's on Don Kelly and his staff to go out there and prove that the front office was right to believe in them and not only not sell, but aggressively add and completely restructure their bullpen. The good thing for them is the schedule lightens up pretty substantially over the final 2 months of the season. Only 5 of their final 15 series are against teams that are currently sitting in playoff position, not including this current series against Milwaukee. That would be 6 of 16. But again, 2 of those series are against Milwaukee, who the Pirates are now 6-1 against as we sit here today. So the opportunity is in front of them. Can they make that ground back up? Can they surpass the 2 teams in front of them right now in the wild card race who are not in but above the Pirates in the Miami Marlins and the San Diego Padres? And can they chase down one or both of the Philadelphia Phillies or Arizona Diamondbacks? It's going to be a lot of fun to keep an eye on, and the Pirates, I think, have given a lot of hope with what they did over the past 72 hours at the MLB trade deadline. Going to close out this show with a little discussion about the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are 1 week into training camp out in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Fortunately, was able to get out there on Back Together Saturday, this Saturday, to watch a little bit of practice. It was football in shorts, so not a lot that you're going to glean from that. Not a lot that you're going to glean from really any of week 1, even the first padded practice. There's not a lot you can take from that. We're really going to start to learn about these guys over the next week, and certainly once you get into preseason action starting next Thursday. But it was a fun atmosphere. It was definitely different. We've heard a lot of people talking about, it's different under Mike McCarthy. And one of the biggest things that I noticed that was different is when anyone, but specifically when I would go to any training camp, you always knew where Mike Tomlin was. And it took me a solid 15 minutes to find Mike McCarthy on Saturday morning. I was looking around. I was like, I don't know where he's at. And even my wife, who was there with me, goes, well, where's Mike McCarthy? And I was like, I don't know. Like, he might have been working with somebody off the field before practice. He might have been working with somebody, on the other field. But the point is, Mike McCarthy is not out there to be seen. I'm not saying Mike Tomlin was, but it just as a result of his personality, you couldn't help but notice Mike Tomlin. You did not notice Mike McCarthy all that much in practice, which I think is a good thing, because that means he trusts, as Zach Smith said last week when we had him on Burgh Breakdown, it means he trusts his other coaches to just handle their business while he goes and does specific things. And I think that's something that most people will agree we have not seen out of Mike Tomlin and his staffs pretty much the entire latter half of his tenure in Pittsburgh. But outside of that, Travis Homer was out there very early. I thought that was interesting. On the jugs machine, has a strange warm-up routine, I think, to say the least, but Interesting is certainly, I think, the overarching word for that one. Drew Aller was down there on the field early, and he looked really good, as everybody has mentioned. Roman Wilson is off to a good start, which I think a lot of people, I don't want to say expected, because there are some people that were out on Roman Wilson coming into this year, but he is very good in training camp typically, and that continues under Mike McCarthy. We'll see, hopefully, if that can translate into the regular season. And the other thing I'll mention is Darnell Washington is just a monster. Anytime I see him in person, it's just accentuated how much more of a massive monster he is than even other players on the offensive line and other players just in the NFL in general. So excited to see him healthy, and excited to see what he's able to do in Mark McCarthy's offense. But if we're talking about the biggest winner of Pittsburgh Steelers training camp week number 1, I don't think there is any question that it's cornerback Asante Samuel Jr. I mean, the opportunity was there from the jump. Joey Porter Jr. is on the PUP list, but I think we all know that there's a little bit more about the contract than there is about the injury when it comes to Joey Porter Jr. Not only that, Jalen Ramsey is on the PUP list. I understand Ramsey is likely going to be a slot corner guy, but that's somebody who could take away outside corner reps in training camp. That is not there. So Asante Samuel Jr. gets the opportunity, and so far, he is taking advantage. I mean, he's been highlighted by pretty much every Pittsburgh writer that he has been a main camp standout, including, and not writer, but he's also been highlighted by Mike McCarthy as being a camp standout, telling Jeff Hathorn of 93.7 The Fan, quote, "He's frankly been one of my favorite players since I arrived here." McCarthy would go on to talk about how hard he works and the way that he has made an impression on him in the early going here. So I'm going to temper my excitement just a little bit because, well, it's football in shorts. You know, in some instances, it's not even football in helmets. We saw a practice in week 1 where they just wore hats doing a walkthrough of sorts. So yes, we have to wait to see until the pads come on. And also we have to wait to see until live reps start flying in the preseason. But I think it would be huge if Asante Samuel could step up and be a very reliable backup to Joey Porter and Jamel Dean. If you look at the Steelers last season, they finished 29th in pass defense. And not only that, they have not been a top 10, excuse me, they haven't been a top 10 pass defense since 2021. So in order to get back there, I think they have the pieces. But the question was, do they have the depth? Because you're going to deal with injuries. You're going to deal, I mean, we already are seeing that right now. Jalen Ramsey's out. Joey Porter's out. Who steps up? You have Jaquan Brisker and Deshaun Elliott on the back end. You do have Brandon Echols as your slot corner, and he was very good in that role last year. You do have Jamel Dean. That's the reason you went out and you acquired him. But you still need somebody to fill those roles whenever those players are injured. And getting a guy like Asante Samuel Jr. to kind of reach the potential that we all expected of him when he came into the league with the Chargers would be a massive boost to this Steelers secondary and would go a long way in getting them back on track going into the 2026 season. So the biggest winner of week 1 is Asante Samuel Jr. I would say Drew Aller is probably solidly in the number 2 spot, because when he was drafted, the question was why, right? Mike McCarthy, one of the first questions he was asked when he was hired to be the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers was, you know, what do you think of Will Howard? And he said, I love Will Howard. And so does the Steelers fan base. Let's not leave that out of this as well. The Steelers fan base fell in love with Will Howard over the past year, believing that he could become the future of the Steelers despite being a 6th round pick in the 2025 draft. And then they use a 3rd rounder on Drew Aller, a quarterback who struggled in big moments at Penn State, a quarterback who was coming off of an injury in his final season of college football, who still, despite having a lot of physical attributes that could tell us that he could become a really good quarterback in the NFL. Hadn't really been able to put it together. Still felt very green despite having multiple years of college football at a premium institution of that sport. So a lot of people had a poor opinion of Drew Aller because of that fact, that he wasn't able to really develop in those 3 years at Penn State. Well, it feels like he's developed more in the past 3 months with the Pittsburgh Steelers than he did in 3 years with the Penn State Nittany Lions. And that's not to say that Penn State can't develop quarterbacks. That's just to say that Mike McCarthy might have been able to unlock something that Penn State wasn't. Building it from the ground up. We saw it at the beginning of rookie minicamp, whenever he was going through the footwork drills, whenever he was going through Mike McCarthy's QB camp. And now you're already starting to see some returns on that. Similar to what I said with Asante Samuel Jr. You don't want to take too much from the first week of training camp. But a lot of people are starting to talk a little bit louder about Drew Aller being impressive at Pittsburgh Steelers camp. And anytime you're a quarterback, those whispers are going to get louder a lot easier. So the more he's able to stack days and stack weeks, and again, we'll see when the preseason starts, if he's able to put impressive performances on paper, I think a lot of people around the Steelers fan base are going to start to elevate him to the level that they have been holding Will Howard to over the past calendar year. So I'm really intrigued to see how both of those players perform this preseason, because we have yet to see Will Howard take a single snap, even in preseason football. So I want to see that. I want to see Drew Aller on that first Thursday night, and I want to see what Asante Samuel Jr. can do, and whether or not he can carry over that impressive first week as camp rolls on here in the beginning of August. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Burgh Breakdown. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Nick Belsky. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Or you can catch us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify by searching Burgh Breakdown. But that's it for this one. We'll see you guys next time.